and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My raw shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclosure that close out the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bunch of great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
Fortunately, CP Libre had another involvement. He's traveling for work, so he'll be back next week. We are talking about what is often referred to as, unfortunately, as a continent that has been very affected by the history of colonialism, imperialism, by Europe in the past, and now more the United States government and Israel even, and still European countries to this day have still continued to steal, loot, and destroy some of the fabrics of these African nations trying to build up. And this has went on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, this has happened probably 500-600 years ago. That's when the colonization of Africa started. And really the colonization didn't end until recently in a lot of these places. For example, Algeria was not liberated from France until 1961. Libya until 1950 often was Italian territory. We had a lot, big parts of Africa were British. There was parts that were Portuguese, and you can see by the languages they speak nowadays. And that's why you have this interesting different variants of languages are spoken in the African continent. English, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, all spoken, is just because of the many different countries that took advantage of the situation. Belgium was even there. I mean, practically almost all the main European colonial powers were there. And there was even a country that was named after one of the colonial masters, and then until 1980 was released, and it was British. It was British controlled. It was Rhodesia, was the name of the country. Rhodesia was named after murderer Cecil Rhodes, killed approximately 10 million Africans. And he had very superioristic mindset about what it meant to be British. I mean, he even was very well quoted as saying that to be British, or to be born British, is like to win the lottery of life. That's what he thought about being British. And, he thought that also meant that now winning that lottery of life also means that you get to take advantage of the African continent. They had control of like 25% of the continent, I think. They battled also with the French and the Belgians and the Portuguese and the Spanish, all for
not, this is not any small piece of land, Africa. In fact, Africa is the largest continent on the planet. And it doesn't seem like that when you look at a Mercator map, which the Mercator map is probably the one you've seen most of your life, which shows Africa is not that impressive of a continent. It looks maybe a little bit bigger than South America. But the truth is that in real life, Africa is the size of, it can fit the United States pretty much in just its northwestern part of it. China could fit in there. Argentina, West Europe, all these countries can almost fit in this giant continent, and it's a lot bigger than Asia, Europe. If you look at a real map, it's just gigantic. And you can think about it when you think about how big it is north to south. For example, South Africa goes all the way down to like the 40th parallel, and then it almost goes all the way to the 40th parallel north. So that's 80 parallels, and there's only 180 parallels on the planet, and the 80 parallels are covered in Africa. And it's a pretty wide too when you go up to the northern part. I mean, there's the Sahara Desert is the biggest desert in the world and doesn't really take up that much of the African continent compared to, there's big jungle ranges, of course, in the central. Then you go, I think it's more like plains in the southern part, where it actually is South Africa. And that was another British exploited area that they continued, even though the British had left. They had left it a independent country in 1948. British descendants of these British people were of the British colonials became the government officials in this new South Africa, which, not surprisingly, had very close ties to Israel, just to be pointed out. And during that time, blacks were, of course, heavily repressed. They were put into a separate system that was definitely inferior, the system that they were put into, to the ones that the whites had installed in South Africa. And the whites were the minority by far. They only had I think that country was only like 15% white, and they were treated much better than the black majority of the country. And then that, of course, ended. It was Mandela. And I'm not going to, be on here and be, say that South Africa, I'm not going to be unrealistic and say South Africa is now perfect fix now that this new Mandela and now it's a new guy that's in charge. I can't think of the guy's name. But this new era of South Africa is perfect. It's not by any means. So I think they're going the right steps by joining the BRICS Development Bank. That is a very good step this new government has done. I think that by being in BRICS and maybe by fostering a better relationship with Argentina down the road, Russia, Brazil, I think these countries are going to urge the South African government to fix the mistakes that they've been making. But in the past, there was no way to fix the completely rotten system of apartheid that really, it seems that Israel in South Africa seemed to partner up and made at the same time practically, because it was about the same time South Africa got its independence from Britain and they installed apartheid. Well, apartheid had already existed, but now it was an independent state with it, when Israel usurped the land from the Palestinians around that time. And then they both made a similar system where an entire race of people are put into an inferior system, and they put into different areas separated from the whites in the country. They get absolutely no representation of any kind in the South African and Israeli governments, respectively. I think that's why. I think when people make that argument, really Israel is I think it's actually worse than apartheid in Israel than. I mean, there was even a quotation by a famous anti-apartheid activist that said something along those lines that was nothing what happened in South Africa compared to what happened in Israel, because there was never. I don't think there was ever bombings happening, or unless I had not read enough history about South Africa, bombings against the people that were living in the ghettos set up for the blacks. I don't think there was ever bombings like what happened in Gaza or the West Bank, or where the whites continued to take land in South Africa until there was no land for the blacks to go to, and they were told to all leave. In Israel, that's what's practically coming to, because there's becoming very little land in the West Bank. Really, all that's left is Gaza, a little tiny strip that where 1 million plus, I think it's like 2 million Palestinians live. This tiny area. I mean, it's like the size of it's really like the size of one major city, really. And they all live in this major city. And that's why the Palestinians from the West Bank are going to be forced there. And eventually, with the continued bombings of Gaza, the eventual plan, like said by the Likud parliamentarian. I remember there was this Likud parliamentarian, or actually, they're called the Knesset. Knesset is their parliament there, and he said that the eventual, that he wants to set up these deportation camps before they send these Palestinians off to somewhere else. Sounds exactly like what Hitler's plan was at first, and I think that that's not above them, not above the Israelis, to just start exterminating people in camps, like the Nazis did. I mean, all the rhetoric, a lot of the main tactics, a lot of who's getting rich behind the scenes, just like in Germany, there was the corporations that were benefiting heavily from the German war machine. There is the same, like in Israel, the corporations benefiting heavily from the Israeli war machine. So it's set up in many the same way. And Israel does come into play because they're right there. I mean, their southwest border was Egypt, and that's the start of going into Africa. Part of Africa, well, Egypt's considered a Middle Eastern country at the same time of being an African country. And there's the Muslim world goes all the way, goes pretty deep into Africa. Africa, I think, is like 21% Muslim, and they mostly live in Algeria. They live in Tunisia, Libya, Morocco, North Africa. But, there's where to start really. I really like to talk about the recent history of North Africa, wherein we've what we've seen in Egypt, what we've seen with Libya. I think Libya's became one of the most unfortunate examples of U.S. imperialism and what NATO did to them. They bombed that country, number one, where there was many civilian casualties. But the saddest thing was, what was Libya about to become? What was Africa about to become under Gaddafi? Gaddafi was making it. He already had made a currency that the Rothschilds had no part of, absolutely no part of. But he was trying to make an African Union. The African Union was going to use this new currency, the gold dinar. The gold dinar was. It would definitely. I think it would have made Africa the most powerful. It could have made Africa the most powerful continent on the planet. I think it would have been more powerful than Asia. Because imagine all those countries, with all their natural resources, nobody to exploit, nobody to financially play games like what's going on in Zimbabwe. Well, what was going on now? It's kind of at its ugly end, where the Zimbabweans have been left without a currency because the Western bankers have played with it so much, put so many sanctions. They didn't have to bomb Zimbabwe in order to completely mess up Mugabe's government's plans to unite that part of Africa, or to really go against the European imperialism, because all they had to do was do financial warfare, and they won their financial warfare practically in Zimbabwe. Because I don't know what's going to happen after Mugabe, steps down, or when he passes. I mean, Mugabe is 90. I think he's turning 92 next year in just a few months, really. So he's very old. But it's not like he's been the leader like some people might be putting in their mind, that he's been the leader for 60 years or something like that. He's faced several elections, I believe, since he became in power in the 80s. The people there love him. I know that he's got a very strong populace that are behind him. But going to what that's counter what in Gaddafi, he had actually he set up a currency that was strong for Libya. Libya was only on its way up. They had the second highest human development index in all of Africa. They had one of the biggest poverty reductions. Their human development is shooting through the roof. They made a giant water project that would make them have water anywhere in the country, so there could be a lot more farming, more irrigation for farming, making it an even more powerful country. Libya was on its way up, going into the 2000s, Also, at the time, Gaddafi had established strong relations with another very up and coming country until they in the same year 2011 start a civil war erupted in their country. It didn't lead to the proposal of a leader that quickly was Assad. Assad's still in power, as we see, but both those countries were really up and coming, had a very good alliance with each other. And also a third player into the alliance is Iran, which their economy is doing good right now, and they're becoming very modernized. I mean, that's one thing that people think, is that since the Islamic Revolution in '79, people think that they went backwards. That there's this extreme Sharia law. They're picturing Saudi Arabia practically in their head, but it's definitely not the case. The country is very modern. People dressed in Western clothing in Tehran. They're very receptive to Westerners. They do not mistreat Jews in any way or Christians, and it's not like they're not repressing ideals that might not necessarily agree with the government's, the Islamic government's rule in the country. For example, Marxist books are allowed in the country when Marxist books might not necessarily agree with how Iran's governed. There's open discussion about how the government runs things. They're not disappearing like what happened on Wall Street, or even disappearing, arresting people for taking part in protests. It's almost completely opposite of what people in the West picture of Iran to be. Going back to how this relates, with all these three countries, for Libya, going back into Africa, they were going to unite Africa very quickly. Probably the next few years they were planning to do that. But then, NATO steps in after these Libyan rebels during Arab Spring very quickly resorted to violence. They had kind of illegitimate claims too. It was obvious. It was a color revolution. A color revolution is a code word that's used in international intelligence and used internationally for people to recognize what a Western sponsored, one that's created. There's no actual real. These people are paid. These people don't have any real political beliefs often, or they're just there. Here's $10. Hold the sign. That kind of stuff. They all get these flags or whatever. They're aspired. Their movement that they're aspiring to create, to make into the government. This has happened in Russia. They've tried to do color revolutions. They successfully did in Ukraine, once, and then they did it successfully. You could call it was a coup, really. That was a color revolution is not necessarily a coup. Coup's violence, internal deceit, people turning on each other. There's the inside the government against the democratically elected leadership. But there's always, it could be a coup on a coup, as in a government that got in by a coup could get overthrown by another coup. Sometimes coups are not, like what happened in Syria in '63, are not necessarily not wanted by the people. A lot of the people wanted the government before that to be overthrown, and the Ba'ath Party, which is the party that's controls Syria nowadays, had a big civilian base that supported them. So it wasn't like it wasn't like, for example, in Chile, where the mass majority was behind Allende, and the small minority supported his overthrow, but the most were extremely against what was going on, extremely against the violence. And then Pinochet's installed in 1973 during that coup. And if you look at these absolutely horrible events, like what happened in '73, or a lot of them have been done by the United States government. A lot have been done in Africa. For example, in the Congo, flashback into the 1960s. Well, there was this new. The Congo, a little background, got their independence from Belgians, I think, in 1960. In 1960, there was the Belgians and the Congo independence movement supporters started battling, had a little bit of a war. And there was this one guy, Patrice Lumumba, and Patrice Lumumba was he was one of the people in the revolutionary movement against the Belgian colonial rule. And being against the Belgian colonial rule, he was also at the same time a leftist. He was a leftist that was against the United States imperialism. I think he was a supporter of Che. He was a supporter of the Latin American Revolution, Latin American revolutionary movement that had happened in Cuba, and was very against the imperialism that the United States had shown in a lot of the third world at the time, South America and Africa, where in South America, the United States and the bankers had installed obedient fascist dictators in a lot of these countries at that point. For example, in '64, which I think was a little bit after, it's all around the same time. So things might start getting a little bit, I might not exactly know what happened first or what happened. But in Guatemala, there was a coup in '64 that brought in a fascist dictatorship that banned guns almost immediately, and then once they banned guns, they eliminated 200,000 natives. And then there was in Venezuela there was a quasi dictatorship that wasn't overthrown until '98 when Chavez became the leader of the country. Until that time, there were two parties that were exactly the same, pretty much, and some prominent leaders in there, like Carlos Andres Perez, that had exerted extreme violence against the leftist demonstrators during the Carazaco in '89. That was in I think February '89 that happened, where all these leftist protesters were shot on the street. The estimates go from 200 to 2,000 during this time were killed. All these different. Brazil had a fascist dictatorship. You just operate this whole installing of fascist dictators. He came back to the United States government, and he literally went back. I mean, these people that were behind, like Klaus Barbie. Klaus Barbie was an ex-Nazi that was very high. He was a high-ranking one too, that ran to Bolivia and was coordinating with the Bolivian government and the CIA to eliminate Che Guevara. And Che Guevara was eventually killed in '68. When Che Guevara, that was his last step. His second step was the Congo. He showed up after Lumumba was overthrown in a coup, which brought in this kind of flamboyant, kind of eccentric dictator. His name I've seen before, not coming to me. He's I think the only time Americans might have seen it is when they had the famous boxing match, when they had George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. That was done in a stadium, and in that stadium there was this giant portrait of this dictator that had taken charge. And that was in '73. Was that fight between Ali and Foreman? That was probably the only time Americans had seen who this guy had seen him on TV, because I think that at that time it was overshadowed by a lot. Again, when these kind of events happen, they're not talked about on the media in the United States. For example, people in the United States did not know that there was a recent coup in South America in '09 in Honduras, where Zelaya was a kind of left-leaning, very popular. He had a lot of popular support, and he was overthrown at gunpoint in '09 and it was proven. I think Hillary Clinton and a lot of these other government, Barack Obama, they were all involved with the overthrow of him, and they've attempted coups too since then. Like, for example, earlier this year, Venezuela, there was a attempted coup against Maduro and the Bolivarian government that was foiled, and that was their second attempted coup that they'd done. There was another coup that they tried against Chavez and the Bolivian government. This was April 11th or 13th, I think, were the dates that happened. It actually ended up in this government had illegitimately took in power in quotations. They didn't actually have any power. Chavez was in power during the whole time, but he was not at the palace at the time. And then this guy, I think Pedro Carmona, took power for 2 days. of the, well, technically he technically wasn't in power, but then Chavez showed back up to the palace as 1,000. My bad on that. That's literally a 1,000-time mistake. It was 1 million protesters against the coup, and Chavez returned to power. And then after that, Carmona fled to Colombia. As a lot of the leaders actually of the coup actually didn't get that much of punishment. And that was kind of a mistake, because I think that later they went on to cause trouble. Like, was probably, who knows, this people might be part of this 2014 through present violence that has went on inside of Colombia by fascist opposition in the country, and like people like Leopoldo Lopez, who just got sentenced. In Africa, Gaddafi, one thing he shared in common with Chavez, Gaddafi was a very strong anti-Zionist. At the same time, though, he respected the cultures. When it comes to Jewish and Muslim cultures, he didn't really think that there should be a Muslim-dominating state. He had a proposal that actually I think it should, I don't see it as too big a problem naming something other than Palestine, even though that's what it was named. It was going to call it Israeltine, which I think acknowledging that Israel has any claim to it, to the land, is not right territorial, not right even biblically. You really look at it, but considering that now those European Jews that immigrated there are there, it's kind of hard to kick. It's not kicking them all out. Might not look good, and it might not. Not everyone's guilty, because these people were the grandsons of people that moved there, and they weren't. That family didn't have any actual connection to the Israeli government that took all the land and did the violent actions against the Palestinians. But he proposed this. I think he made both proposals. Making but really the idea was a one state. He said that we made clear that two states cannot exist on a place that's the size of Connecticut. But he had made the idea of a unified socialist state, I think, or maybe just you just really like how the idea was unified, no secular. He wanted that that there's no religious preference in the government, neither Jewish nor Muslim. And Gaddafi, he got a lot of backlash from the Israeli government, of course. I mean, people, I think the Israeli government had called him. They said that he was like Hitler. They said that that this guy was just, of course, the one that they always use, anti-Semitic. I mean, I think that comparison to Hitler that they gave him, the media had given to Hitler, or given to Gaddafi, about comparing him to Hitler, was just absurd. Compare a guy that did all that for his country, and by the overall, I mean, how the people's standard of living changed in Libya, where people went from it was a poor kingdom before Gaddafi to a country where the people have been empowered into local politics, into the state or the provincial level of politics in Libya, and to the federal level of politics in Libya, and very open, almost like a direct democracy for anything under, Gaddafi, his power is actually a little bit exaggerated also. They compared him to Hitler, yet his executive role wasn't that big. The parliament of Libya had a lot of control about what really went on in the country. The parliament in Libya was was complete. It was all directly elected by the people, and they accused Gaddafi of also helping out his friends, helping out his family, to get to power, positions of power. But it wasn't like they were not qualified, as we can see by the results. And these were like cabinet positions too. Not saying that's the best system, but I'm saying is that other countries do it, and other countries don't seem to get these kind of results that Gaddafi did. I mean, he obviously knew something about his family / friends that got these positions, because they ran the country very well, especially after the 80s, when there was an intervention actually by Reagan, who, of course, Gaddafi had a lot of funny insults. I mean, I think he called it crazy cowboy and stuff like that. I think he called. I think that was actually his insult. He used crazy cowboy because of how Reagan acted during the '86 tensions. They actually started bombing a little bit of Libya, but it was actually what was bad is that Gaddafi. I mean, there's a lot of people were killed in. Even Gaddafi's son was killed during the '86 bombing, and then it ended for a while. And then after that interference, during the '90s and 2000s, Libya's economy started to soar. It also was partially helped up by the fact that it was a common tourist spot, even for Europeans, whose governments might not like that they were going to Libya, but the people certainly liked the vacation spot of Libya for the fact that it was a very beautiful place with the beaches. I mean, the city of Tripoli was a beautiful city until the war, just like Damascus was over in Syria. And both those countries had a civil war that started in 2011, but Gaddafi was thrown out of power. We're actually about to reach the 4th anniversary on the 20th, I think. He was killed in his hometown, or by his hometown, Sirte, in Libya. And anyways, if anybody wants to, if anybody has anything Africa related, I've said it. I want people coming in here, using. Unless they're willing to debate. I don't want people coming in here with the same mainstream media arguments about why Africa, they don't talk about the true history. Don't talk about what the United States government has done, or what the New World Orders, has done to Libya. Libya and other powerful African countries, Africa as a whole, what Israel has done, what a lot of these European countries have done. And I'll go into a little bit later, is that not every European country is the same towards Africa, but when I talk about these European countries, I'm talking about the ones that the Rothschilds have power over: Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, a few other countries. And I think all those countries, the Rothschilds have power to this day. And I think back then, when these countries were kingdoms and whatnot, the colonial powers that they were back in those days, the Rothschilds were definitely control these countries. But if anybody wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. We haven't mentioned too much about some of these countries that are pretty important. I mean, I briefed over Zimbabwe, briefed over South Africa at the beginning of the show, briefed over the Congo, briefed over Libya. Oh yeah, we'll talk about Somalia. That's the big, that's a big elephant in the room. I mean, we'll just do a little brief introduction about Somalia. I mean, Dylan, when you besides the argument that people always say, well, if you don't like our government, go to Somalia or something like that, sometimes idiots use. I mean, what's the stuff that you're going to associate with Somalia?
Unjust wars.
I mean, wars, chaos, extreme poverty, a lot of just pirates. I mean, there's nothing really too.
U.S. greed.
What? Well, most people wouldn't say U.S. greed in there, but that's the truth. Is that what started it? What started is real. I mean, Somalia was never, of course, a blossoming country to any extent. But
780 you're on.
Hello, caller. You're live. What topic you want to talk about in Africa?
Oh, it's about Africa. I'm calling from Canada, and I'm listening to the show. And, Chris, you're kind of going over, you were mentioning Gaddafi, you're going all over the place. And it's obvious to me that you've done an awful lot of research. And then it was pointed out to me that you are a young person, and I just need to tell you that I'm really impressed. My name is,
Well,
I'm
thanks, Paul.
Papalupa from Chat.
Well, what's your name again there? I didn't catch it there.
I'm from Chat, Papalupa, and my name's Liza. And I just want to
Okay.
say I really appreciate what you're doing. I really do. Your shows cover a lot of territory, and this is what we need. I don't watch the news, but I rely on, like I'm dealing with things up here in northern Canada, but I really appreciate it when someone gives a synopsis of what they see happening.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I try to do my best, and I'm not going to say that even I'm to the top level of what the research about these topics, but I do cover when I do these research. I try to get a general view about around the world. I don't just look at one place. I mean, if we're talking about, for example, South America, that's really my expertise because I am Colombian. I live in Florida now, but I know a lot about Venezuela, and that's why I go back to compare people. Like, for example, I was comparing Chavez, Gaddafi, and how they helped their own peoples in Venezuela and Libya. I want to go all over the place in Africa because it's so much history too. I mean, I know quite a bit now about Africa, and there's just so much history, a lot of unfortunate history, and that's why it's gone to the point it is now. But I think that there's hope, and I think that, for example, like when we're talking about Libya, I think they're eventually going to recover, and I think that the similar government to when Gaddafi was in power will eventually take back charge, and they'll be stable again, and the people can start to work their way back into prosperity. But I think that these shows, I think what's the best thing, the best moral that could be put here is that the mainstream media, of course, in the United States are going to show just a few topics. Right now, or in Canada, right now in the United States, there's fluff stories, and there's one they're going to scare people about, politicize, which I think is the most disturbing part. What happened in Oregon a few days ago. And
I know, it just keeps happening and happening and happening. But there comes a point where, and to me it's all about balance. The balance is where there's equal focus in your life, where you're actually reaching out and meeting people through this incredible internet venue, and you're also revealing what's going on in the news. I was in Venezuela. It was maybe 4 years ago, and I went down there because I wanted to help out with some children at risk. I'm a teacher, and I thought that I might be able to help. When I got down there, I found out that none of the orphanages or any of the things that were taking tremendous amount of money from Canadians for actually existed on the ground. And I ended up being in a hotel. I couldn't leave. I was locked in a cab, and they were demanding that I pay like 10 times as much before he would open the doors. I've also lived in Mexico. I've traveled a lot, and I've never felt the feeling that I did in Venezuela. Like the people on the street, you get a feeling for a place. So,
unknown number, you're on.
I got 2 callers now. Hey, other caller.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Glenn.
Nice to meet you, Glenn. So what do you want to contribute to the conversation?
I'm listening to it right now. I don't know if you're delayed or if I'm live. Am I on air right now?
We're live on there right now.
Yes.
Okay. I'm listening to what you're talking about there, and I'm going to shut off the audio that I'm listening to. I'm calling you from a Gmail phone.
Okay.
Okay. That's why your
clear,
number
so
was that's why your number didn't show.
Yeah, I'm calling from Canada. Well, contribute. What I'd like to contribute is you're talking about Africa.
Yeah.
Oops, you there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm getting
on a
delayed
landline, so
feedback.
I can't mute, but I'm being very quiet and I'm listening. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, one day. I guess while we figure out this audio thing, I'm going to answer you. First caller's response to that about Venezuela is that I think that, again you can't compare again the people in Venezuela. There's going to be of course hostile people and there's going to be corrupt people that are cab drivers and stuff. It depends your tourist experience. It all depends on how you carry yourself, and it all depends on unfortunately, no other way to put it. If you're a gringo, they're going to be a little bit hostile due to recent events. I mean, remember in 2002, hundreds of people ended up dead on the streets because the United States initiated a coup. They tried to do what happened in '73 in Chile all over again in '02 in Caracas. There's a bad history between, and unfortunately our governments have set up the situation. Ottawa, D.C. Ottawa wasn't involved, from my knowledge, but D.C. was involved in the coup heavily, and also I think Madrid in Spain was somewhat involved in because the king of Spain had a big personal problem with Hugo Chavez. But I think that again and of course back in the 80s when our government was supporting the brutal dictatorship of Carlos Andres Perez, where I was talking about earlier, 2,000 ended up dead that time on the streets in just a few weeks in the Carazaco. Again, you can't count, but if you look at other places, for example, Caracas, when you went there, that you see horrible slums like the 90s where there's giant buildings of just blight were in the city, people homeless, people, anybody can get an education there now. It wasn't like that back then. Anybody can get health care, and it's not like it's being taken out of the middle class people's pockets or something like that, like someone might assume at first. It's being taken from the corporations that still try to screw Venezuela to this day. The corporations in Venezuela are behind the violence that you see on the streets nowadays because they want a government that's more friendly. They want Capriles Radonsky. Of course, the United States government wants the Capriles Radonsky in power, or they want Leopoldo Lopez, who's this guy is an open fascist practically. He's known as that, at least in Venezuela.
I just want to say you just said something really important, and what you said is the word history. And we're discovering how they're trying to destroy history, and I think I see you trying to dig into what's really happening, and you're putting this out there on the airwaves, forever. I'm going to leave the conversation, and I'll listen to the show. But I actually called just to say thank you for what you're doing, and many people appreciate it.
Well, it's nice having such a positive caller come on, give some good vibes to the show. I mean, it seems like we've had a lot of the opposite at times, but thanks for calling in, and hopefully you do the same up there in Northern Canada, and having a good night.
Yeah, you got a lot of Canadians at UCY, and I think that's awesome. Talk to you later. Bye.
Talk to you later.
Hi, it's Glenn from Canada chiming in again here. I'm on the east coast of Canada, and I just accidentally bumped into your show. I've never listened to it before. I don't know what your viewership is or what kind of bench you have there. You're going all around the world. I think it would be kind of redundant to say that the history of the world and the history of war are pretty much intertwined. But you're looking at how does that affect things today. And are you there?
Yeah, we're still here. We're listening.
Yeah.
Just
finish. So there's all kinds of people from all kinds of perspectives. No one's going to know all the history of war, but you see all these patterns. World War I, there's a lot of people that make the case that was about eugenics and lowering population. World War II, same thing. And I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of different talk show hosts who believe that eugenics is playing a part in what they're trying to do right now. There's an awful lot of people who believe that we have too many people on the planet, it's too hard to manage. And so via soft kill and by war, it would seem that there's an awful lot of people in high positions that, that profit off it. Like I saw something today about Halliburton or one of these outfits charging the American Army $100 to do a load of laundry in the Middle East. So, if people want to talk about solutions until they get the profits, PRFITS, and profits out of war, that activity is going to continue. Does that make sense to you?
Well, yeah. I mean, the history of war is money. It's really, for example, a lot of these wars we see that are happening going on. Like right now, we see this big war right now. Well, it could become a big war, but it's taken the main stage of American news and Canadian news and Russian news, and all around the world, everybody's talking about Syria. What's that really about? Do you really think that's about the same narrative that they bring every time, a brutal dictator, and then Team America's got to save the day or whatever?
I have a good friend of mine in Syria. She's in medical school, and I told her to get out of there because I saw the writing on the wall, and she's in her 20s, so her prefrontal cortex is not fully formed, and she doesn't have as much fear as she should probably. But anyway, she stayed, and she's an advocate for Bashir al-Assad. She sent me photographs of herself on a beach in a bikini. You're not going to get photographs like that from Saudi or Iran. Bashir al-Assad is a medical doctor who dresses in a suit and apparently gets along quite well with Vladimir Putin. They're not going to say he's a good man or a bad man because I don't know him, but there's a heck of a lot worse people and worse leaders in the Middle East than Bashir al-Assad.
Well, actually, the weird thing is that you point out is that there is an unlikely alliance, and it goes back to common enemies. Assad and Iran are actually pretty well connected and pretty well. In fact, Iran is helping Assad fight ISIS, which he's been the number one fighter to this point against ISIS. But now the Russians are. I mean, I've seen some videos there are just turning them into toast right now. I mean, they've got these weapons. The Russians have brought in weapons that ISIS wouldn't be able to, even if they had 1,000 years to develop their own weapons, which are all supplied from somebody in the West, the United States. I mean, Putin pretty much told everybody that an event at the UN General Assembly. I don't think it was during the speech, but it was to the side. But anyways, I think ISIS's days are numbered now since the Russians have gotten involved. And yes, Assad is a secular country.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I actually spent 3 months. I spent 3 months in Qatar, and by being in there, I got to meet people from all over the Middle East and got a bit of a feel for it. And the American media doesn't portray the Middle East accurately at all, from my point of view and from what I've seen. But what I find interesting is that Muammar Gaddafi stood at the United Nations and talked about how the U.S. shouldn't be dictating to anybody because they murdered their own president and covered it up. He was speaking of JFK. Muammar Gaddafi then went to the Arab League and spoke very unflattering about how the U.S. problem in the Middle East has been caused because when Iraq was going to go into Saudi, Saudi called in the U.S. to save their ass. So, interestingly, after Gaddafi ticked off the King of Saudi Arabia at the Arab League, the King of Saudi said to him, and you can check this out on YouTube, he said, "Your lies lie behind you and the grave lies in front of you." And Muammar said, "What does he mean? I don't know what he means." Well, I knew what he meant. That was a death threat. And he was dead a little bit while later. What happened to Saddam Hussein? Anybody who's an enemy of the House of Saud gets done. And so ISIL, as Barack Hussein Obama likes to say, is a creation of the CIA and the Americans and the Saudis. And now Putin is raining all over the parade by going in there and fighting against not U.S. soldiers, but he's fighting against U.S. weaponry. And that might be overly simplistic, but that's the way I see it. You guys got a comment on that?
I can't disagree on really anything you said. I mean, ISIS was created by the United States government. They didn't just come out of nowhere, like I said. They didn't just show up out of the desert at one point and start like what they try to claim, started taking over oil wells and oil refineries and somehow made profited their way. I'm like, who's even buying this ISIS oil in the first place? That would bring up a few questions itself. But there's documents, there's footage, there's all kinds of damning evidence coming from many sources that show the Saudis, it shows Israel, it shows the United States, all, were behind ISIS's creation because they all want Assad gone. You know, they're
But,
just
yeah,
like
but
they
I
want to
think what happened. I think what's happened up till now, it's starting to change because alternative media is now pushing the narrative. But up until now, Saudi Arabia has gotten always no coverage in North America in my lifetime. Very, very little. And nobody understands the names of the organizations. Most people don't understand the difference between Sunni and Shia and Wahhabis and Alawites. They just don't know. And it's beyond their scope. It's beyond their vocabulary. But what I think is that, you know, our Prime Minister here, Stephen Harper, made a deal which was originally for $10 billion, but it got up to $15 billion. Canadians are making $15 billion worth of Canadian-made weaponized vehicles for the King of Saud. Now, the King of Saud, they made the deal with, just died. He left 22 wives, 100 concubine whores, and I think to date this year they chopped the heads off 127 people in public. So as far as I'm concerned, my Canadian Prime Minister is consorting with known terrorists, right?
Yeah,
and I'm not happy. And I'm not happy with that because I did 2 years in the military. I come from a long line of military people, and I don't like to think of me or my family or anybody having been mercenaries. But if I look back in history, I find out that most soldiers are mercenaries, whether they know it or whether they don't know it. But what's happening now is people have to find out what is the nexus of evil in the Middle East, and that is the House of Saud. Are there a lot of diabolical people over there? Yes, but the most diabolical is the House of Saud. Then when you start unpacking that can of worms, you end up finding out that you have to find out what Mecca is about, what Medina is about, and what the whole totalitarian ideology of Islam is about. And that makes some people quite uncomfortable, and they want to pull out the bigot card, racist card, whatever they want to call you card. But there's a huge difference between their ideology and Western ideology.
I got to stop you right there because I think that is a little bit I think off the wall to start saying that all people that follow the Islamic faith you're following this terrorist ideology or whatever, or some kind of ideology that's totalitarian. When if you for example, again, how if you listened to my show earlier, I described the true situation in Iran. It's not what the West has painted out. It's not what these anti-Islamic medias have painted out. Syria is not. Syria's people there are very faithful to Islam, but at the same time they're not using it to. There's a difference between people who use Islam to oppress others and people who follow it and they just follow it because there's there's nothing that says in there that you must oppress oppress the people that are non-religious, or nothing that the Bible or the Torah or any other religion would say. I mean, if you're going to talk about the Quran, you really need to talk about the Talmud first, because the Talmud, you want to get a whole other can of worms and look at Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv and by the way, in Riyadh, both work together hand in hand into this destruction of the Middle East. And there's only a few countries that oppose them, and they all look back to D.C. And if you really want to go back to the ultimate person in charge, it's the House of Rothschild. They're the ones that they control the banks, and if you control the banks, you pretty much control everything.
Well, I've read the Torah.
Against slavery.
Yeah. I've read the Torah. I've read some Talmud scriptures. I've read the Bible, and I've read the Quran. I'm very familiar with the Medicis, and then came the House of Rothschild. I understand this stuff, and I'm not trying to measure my gear against anybody else's or my knowledge against anybody else's. However, we have to stop equating things that are not equivalent. Half of Israel are atheists, okay? And yes, the Rothschilds are Zionists. There's like I said, there's no innocent people around.
To clarify, I wasn't going to say it was about religion. I was going to say that it's the Jewish faith in itself, the people that follow the Torah. Not all Jews follow the Talmud, for one thing. There's nothing that's really that oppressive, but a lot of Jews nowadays, yes, are Zionists, but there's a lot of Jews that are against Zionism nowadays. Yeah. Zionism, I'm against 100%. I'll just clarify that. But Judaism, I'm not against.
Yeah, well, here's what I look at. I was a math, physics, calculus teacher, and I've studied a lot of psychologists. Have you studied Edward Bernays at all?
No, you would have to actually tell me a little bit about him.
Edward Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and when the royals were falling in a favor, he made them popular. He got presidents elected. In the United States, Edward Bernays was living there, and his uncle Sigmund Freud was in Germany, not doing so well financially, and Edward Bernays commercialized a lot of Sigmund Freud's thoughts. Now, Eddie Bernays, his biggest stunt he pulled was the tobacco companies were ticked that they only had half of the possible demographic, which were men were smoking because it was socially acceptable, women didn't. So he lined up these debutantes in an Easter parade. I believe it was in New York. Don't quote me. You'd have to look it up. But he had these beautiful women pull up their skirts when they were right in front of the press and pulled out cigarettes, and they lit them up, and he called them torches of liberty. And he also put the packaging of the cigarettes the same as colors that were fashionable that year. But anyways, he's known as the father of modern public relations. He took propaganda and put a different word on it, called it public relations. And he's very good at indoctrinating people. So I've studied indoctrination and a little bit of this stuff in my pastime. And what I'm saying is that we have a lot of people want to go around. As soon as you slag any religion, they'll pick up another one and say that's just as worse. Well, or that's worse, or it's just as bad, or they're making things that are equivalent that aren't equivalent. And in reading the Quran, I was quite surprised to find out that it's unlike other religious texts that have multitudes of authors, numerous authors, scholars, scribes. Look at all those books and look at all the authors of books. The Quran is are all the thoughts that came through the Prophet Muhammad, who was illiterate, who had scribes write down his thoughts. And if you read Quran 5.33, 8.12, and 9.5, that'll give you just a little insight into what the directives of the Prophet meant. Because when I hear people say, oh, what about the Christian Crusades? Well, if you know the history behind them, the Christian Crusades were a blowback from Muslim encroachments, first of all. Second of all, when a Christian rapes, when a Christian murders, when a Christian engages in thievery, they're going against the teachings of Jesus, who said, love your neighbor and love your enemy. The Prophet Muhammad said, subjugate your neighbor, oppress your neighbor, tax him with a jizya tax, and came up with all kinds of great, wonderful ways to kill anybody you perceive as your enemy. Now, does that mean that all Muslims are bad? No. But when Muslims are engaging in jihad, and when they are raping, pillaging, and plundering, they're following the Prophet, whereas when Christians do it, they're going against the teachings of their Prophet. So they're not equivalent. And somebody would say, oh, you're just a Christian. I'm not a Christian, because I don't believe you should love your enemy. Right? I think that's unnatural. I think that goes against natural law. There's lots of teachings of Jesus I disagree with. However, what I find just a silly notion is that when people equate things that are unequivalent. And Islam, I mean, yes, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are Abrahamic faiths that engage in mystical and mythical and magical and fantastical stories, but they're not equivalent.
I actually disagree with you there.
That's fine. Go ahead, Ted. I'd love to be proven wrong.
They're very equivalent in that way. Christianity has been violent in the past, extremely violent in the past, acted in their faith. The Crusades were literally Christians acting within what they perceived as their faith to oppress and kill those who they believed to be their enemies. Modern-day jihad is the equivalent of that.
Can you quote any verse? Can you quote any verse where Jesus said to kill?
But let me go to Sultan is dead. Okay, who do you think were the governments that were behind the Crusades? Who do you think they were funded by? At that time, we're talking about the British government. We're talking about the Holy Roman Empire. We're talking about the Spanish Empire at that time of these people that were behind the Crusades. Who do you think they were funded by? They were funded by the same bankers. Maybe they didn't have the same names at the time, but they were funded by
same type of people. I agree with that. Yeah. Prior to the Medici, the Templar Knights, I guess. If you're talking about the Crusades, the Templar Knights were probably the biggest backers.
Well, the Medici's were pretty big. I think they actually didn't come until around the third. They were right around the Medici's fell apart when the Rothschilds started to show up in the 1600s. They got really prominent, but the Rothschilds. There's no verifiable date when they started because there's a lot of rumors that I think that personally they would have been around even longer than that, but they would just had a different name because that is a pseudonym kind of. Rothschild just means red shield in German. They changed their name from Boer, and I don't know what their name could have been changed from then. They might have changed their name 5 times over a time of 2,000 years for all we know. But
yeah. But getting back to the point I was making there is that no, not all religions are equivalent, and like I said, if you want to say that Christians behaving badly don't represent the teachings attributed to Jesus Christ.
Glenn,
now again,
Glenn,
was Jesus Christ?
Here's the verse you wanted. Anyone arrogant enough to reject the verdict of the judge or the priest who represents the Lord your God must be put to death. Such evil must be purged from Israel. Deuteronomy 17:12.
That's got nothing to do with Jesus.
That's in the Bible. It's advocating for murder. If
that's Deuteronomy, if that's Deuteronomy, that's the old Hebrew teachings.
Okay, Exodus.
That's Judaism.
Exodus.
Well, here's another thing that I don't think you're put. Okay, all these religions are pretty much interlinked because, for example, you have in the Bible you have books that come back from the Torah, and so those are connected in that part. And and ultimately, when you Islam. Also, I want to go to another point here in a second. That just came to me, but Islam is the collection. I mean, it's the final message. That's what they believe. The people who are Muslim believe that's the final message. It's a connection. It's a collection, kind of all the messages brought from the prophet Abraham, who they believe received the first message, and they believe Jesus received the second message. He was the second prophet, and Muhammad was the last prophet. That's what they believe, and they believe none of them were holy either. They believe there's never been a divine person besides Allah, which you probably know all this. Of course, this is basic. Islam 101.
I look at Jesus as a social philosopher and a darn good one for his time, and died. Now, some people say that he was a creation of Rome. Some people say it was fictitious. Records keeping weren't so good around Jesus, but Prophet Muhammad was born in 570 A.D. His third wife was Aisha. He took her when she was 6. He molested her until she was 9. He consummated the marriage when she was 9 and he was 54. One of his 13 wives, he beheaded her husband, her brother, and her father the day he took her as his wife. Right?
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between the story of Jesus and Muhammad. Right? Now, how anybody could say this to me? What's that?
Well, okay, I don't think something doesn't sound right about that. It's like I don't think he was 570 because he wasn't. I'm pretty sure at the time he was younger than 54. Number two is that there's no actual damning proof about the age of his wife. Just saying, and I think yes, his wife was younger.
The Muslim scholars argue when the marriage was consummated, was she 9 or was she 11? That's what the argument is about. You can go look at that from Islamic Imam scholars themselves.
That was justified.
And that's why they still marry children. That's why they still marry children in Yemen.
We're not saying that's justified.
I didn't say it was justified, but I'm just telling you there's a big difference between the teachings of Jesus and the life of Jesus, which is vague, and the teachings. And I can tell you this: look it up right now if you got the internet. When I tell you a date is right, 570 A.D. was the birth of Muhammad.
Yes, you are correct. I just looked it up. You are correct.
Yeah, and Aisha was betrothed to him, and there are hadith of him molesting her in the bathtub, sucking on her tongue, and doing something that's called thiging. I don't want to describe what thiging is on air, but you could probably imagine what that is. And he consummated the marriage with Aisha by Muslim scholars when she was 9 and he was 54. Okay? And he cut the head off 800 Jewish people for no other reason but that they were Jewish and he wanted their stuff.
Okay.
Okay. You know what, Glenn?
These are historical facts that might seem offensive, but when you do your research, you guys say your researchers
from earlier because you said that their whole tactics about war. Just look online and there's certain verses in the Quran or whatever about that counter what you were saying about it actually is complete opposite about what they're supposed to do in war. But anyways, this is not a this wasn't supposed to be a religious argument. We've already spent like 20
Well, no,
minutes.
the history of religion and war go hand in hand,
It's
right?
supposed to be in Africa, and this is not. And we actually try to kind of keep religion out of these shows because it just does nothing but divide. I have many people from different faiths listen to this show. You're Canadian. We have people from the Middle East even that listen to this show, and we don't want to cause
there lies the problem. There lies the problem is people don't want to offend people, and I look at it this way: I'm 45 years old, and you know what? I really don't care who I offend anymore. If you want to read and do the research, you guys say you're researching. Read, do your research, and you're going to find out what. Now, again, I'm not saying all Muslims are this. What I, in fact, have said to people, I had a Muslim person in front of me one day from Turkey. She was a foreign exchange student here, and she said she was a Muslim. I said, oh, and I looked at her. She had no head covering on, anything. She had 3 boyfriends. And I said, so you're a Christian? She said, no, I just told you I'm a Muslim. I said, no, you're a Christian. And she said, didn't you hear what I just said? I said, did you read your Quran? She said, yes. I said, do you know that Jesus is mentioned 27 times exactly in the Quran as Isa? She said, I was unaware of that. I said, well, you didn't read your whole Quran. And you might want to know that your prophet said that Jesus is the Messiah. He didn't die. He ascended into heaven. And when I die, I'm just a man. I'm going in the ground. And when Jesus comes back, he's going to judge me. Did you know that? She didn't know that. Okay? So she wasn't a Muslim subscribing to Islam. She was following what, her family taught her. And like I said to her, I said, listen, I can call myself a porn star. It doesn't make me a porn star. Producing porn that's widely distributed and appreciated would make me a porn star. Calling myself a porn star doesn't make me a porn star. Do you understand the analogy?
We understand your points, yes.
But yeah, so people that call themselves Muslims, if the word Islam means submission. The word Muslim means one who submits. So if you're not submitting to the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad, okay, and you're not one who submits, then you can call yourself whatever you want so you don't get killed or you don't be called an apostate or you don't get stoned, but you're not really a Muslim. And like I said, I'll get off it now because I know I'm making you guys very uncomfortable, but I have no idea.
It's uncomfortable. It's just that we have a topic that we had a topic and we haven't talked about Africa. We haven't said the word Africa in about 20 minutes, and I know. I guess I see your your points, but I don't agree with your points. I guess I can see how this.
Wait, here's something you may or may not know. Do you know anything about the Rhodes Scholarship?
Yeah, we actually mentioned about Cecil Rhodes, and it's named after.
I heard you talk about
that. 10 million Africans.
Yeah,
and he was
exactly.
I heard Zimbabwe.
Yeah, but so anyways, the Rhodes Scholarship still lives on to further the Rothschilds' goals, right? If you know anybody who's a Rhodes Scholar, essentially it's a honey trap, right? They take you over to England, they introduce you to the right people. That's why Rhodes Scholarships are so prestigious. It's the connections more so than the money and the education. And that all came at, they came at a Rhodes debauchery that he did in South Africa.
Well, anyways, I mean, I know all about Cecil Rhodes. I know all about a lot of these, again, that's what I've talked about a little bit, is that, these are the forgotten genocides that were committed in Africa by, like the Belgian government, in the Congo, all these, a lot of West Europe nowadays, and it's been erased out of the textbooks, and erased out of the textbooks in the United States. It's been, there's King Leopold. I mean, King Leopold is probably, I would say, right up there with Hitler and Stalin as some of the worst Europeans ever to live for what he did to the African people. And Cecil Rhodes, of course, I know the Rhodes Scholarship, of course, Bill Clinton's famous for getting that. It's an elite club. It's a club for people. It paves their way in order to get into that kind of, the people that actually run stuff. It's kind of like the way into the organizations, the people that are in that get connected to Skull and Bones and get connected into the other high-level secret societies, fraternities, And
the secret societies you can get into through connections and nepotism is one thing, but the Rhodes Scholarship has academic criteria. So what they actually do is it's a brain trust. They get access to the best and brightest up-and-coming minds in university because you don't get a Rhodes Scholarship unless you have a 4.0 GPA in the States or an A+ average or something like that here in Canada. To get a Rhodes Scholarship is hard. So in fact, it's a bit of a honey trap for them to get some of the best and brightest minds, working for them.
Well, yeah. They take you over to England. That's where a lot of the elite organizations have started. A lot of these secret societies, they originate, I think, in Cambridge and Oxford and over there. So yeah, and of course they're going to treat you nicely. I mean, they wouldn't treat you bad, because if they treat you bad, then you wouldn't want to be part of their little organizations. I'm kind of familiar, and I know that some of the famous recipients, and I know, of course, that the fact that it was named after Cecil Rhodes, it makes sense why it would go back to England. I mean, Cecil Rhodes, if there's anybody that's been patriotic, the Queen and English cause, I mean, he's the one that said, like I said earlier in the show, that he believed that if you were born English, you won the lottery of life. Well,
he was just a puppet, anyways. When he died, he died at 48. His entire fortune was left to the Rothschilds. I think J.P. Morgan in the United States, he owned something like 18%, and the Rothschilds owned him for 82%. A lot of people don't realize how far the Rothschilds' tentacles go.
Well, yeah, of course, the Cecil Rhodes and the Rothschilds were connected, and Cecil Rhodes did die pretty early, from what I understand, and it's kind of a forgotten fact about about what happened in the British colonialization. Yeah, he was just a figure, and he wasn't the leader of Britain. And even the British government don't lead themselves. I mean, these governments have finance.
Yeah. Like I tell people, your CIA that you have there in the States, they don't work for your government. The CIA doesn't work for your people. The CIA works for international bankers. That was pretty much proven in 1963 with Kennedy, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. But I wanted to go, but yeah, what I was going to say is that, forgotten fact is that they, not only in Zimbabwe, they took away their identity and everything. That's what it got turned into Rhodesia. That's how it got its name, and it was pretty much directly created by the Rothschilds, Rhodesia, and then that's the name that stayed all the way till like 1980. I think we have another caller here, so I think
it was nice chatting to you guys, man. Take care.
Hey, hang on, man. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question. You brought up something about half the Jews in Israel being atheists.
Yep.
That's a pretty interesting point there. All right, so if half the Jews in Israel are atheists, does that make Judaism a race? Is that a religion? Is it an ethnicity now? If half the Jews in Israel, which is what, like 4,000 Jews? All right,
sorry, I misspoke, and I'm not backtracking. I misspoke. I should say half of the citizens in Israel are atheists, right? To say a Jew is an atheist, that's wrong. I should have said that half the citizens of Israel are atheists, and I got that from a reputable source a while back. You may want to fact check it, but the fact is that, like, the images we see of the Wailing Wall and your, is it
right? Okay, so half the citizens, and I'm not exactly sure on the demographics of Israel or like what their population stats are, but I'm going to guess that I'd say a good 90% of the citizens of Israel will probably be considered Jewish, air quotes around that, right? So that would be the kind of part of the population that you're saying half of the total population of Israel would be, comprised of a portion of this 90%, right?
They're atheists, and they don't. And the religion isn't pushed, right?
Well, it doesn't have to be pushed when it's when it's the path of your actual raising. I mean, there's a difference between say a Roman Catholic is raised and a Jewish person is raised. I mean, there's just a difference in the books. Yeah, the
books, the traditions, the sects, the cultures. Yeah, I mean, Roman Catholicism practice.
What I'm trying to get out here with you, because I mean, you kind of like came on strong with this, and it kind of concerns me. If you're going to say that half of them are atheists, and then like immediately kind of like start ripping on Islam, it kind of seems a little disingenuous. It's a little more concerning. It almost seems like this isn't it isn't genuine. I mean, you can't like start indicting an entire religion and then just blow off another religion. And say, well, fuck, half of them are atheists too. You know, I mean, they don't count. It's beyond that. It's not.
You know what?
That's
a great point. That's a great point, and I concede your point. They didn't let me rip on the Jews. I could rip Abraham in this whole Hebrew nonsense. I'll rip all that apart as well.
Actually,
right?
you were actually about to. I was actually starting to talk about Israel a little bit, but then you continue talking about Islam the way that you did. So it's not like you didn't let. It's not that we didn't let you talk about Zionists. In fact, if the way you were talking about the Middle East, it seemed like you don't think the Zionists have that big of a role, or that they really are behind. You know, when you talk about the House of Saud being the ones that are causing destruction and all these terrible things in the Middle East. Well, let me ask you: would the House of Saud even be there if there wasn't their little buddies in Tel Aviv? No, they would have been already taken out.
No, you're exactly right. We all know that. That's well known that there's a major alliance between them. But I can tell you one thing.
Not just a major.
People make alliances. People make alliances. I'll be honest with you. If you want to look at your violent Muslims, look at the guys with the long beards and the short mustaches, because that's how Muhammad told his people to identify themselves: long beard, short mustaches. And if you look at the way the House of Saud acts, they've got the French for goatees on the go. Right? I don't even know if they actually fully subscribe to Islam rather than just use it.
That has got to be the most horrible thing I've ever heard, because if you can say that, if you can say that,
go look at the forehead. Go look at the forehead shooter.
Wait up.
Look at the forehead shooter. Look at what he looks like.
I've got short hair I've got short hair and a goatee, and I live in Texas.
You got a short mustache and a long goatee? Cool.
Yes, sir,
I do.
issues.
You got fashion issues. Cool. Right?
Awesome.
I'm just telling you. You look at the teachings of Muhammad. You look at the teachings of Muhammad.
Excuse me, sir. You came up with this outrageous generalization and stereotype, and yet if the same thing was to be said about, well, who fucks with the money, you look at the people with the big hook nose. That would be completely unacceptable.
I wouldn't disagree with it.
I'm detecting a tad bit of favoritism, something that is really just not genuine.
Well, yeah,
what I'm saying.
Like Michael might be trying to get at, is that it does seem a little bit disingenuous, because now that we brought up the fact that you didn't talk about Israel, but you were really willing to talk about Muslims, and not just the House of Saud or just a few, that's the ones that are causing havoc and destruction. They're funded proxies by the United States government and Israeli government. But no, you wanted to talk about the whole Islamic faith, and it probably another thing is that it's not that I'm worried about offending Muslims that are listening to the show, but I don't want to be causing division based on religion. This is what's supposed to be mostly a geopolitical show, especially when we're talking about Africa. And yes, we're going to have the Zionists we're going to talk about how the Zionists have caused a lot of problems in Africa. But like you said, now you seem to be wanting to change your stance. That no, it's not just Muslims. I have this stance towards also the Jewish faith as well. It does seem a little bit.
I look at them all as mind. Here, so that there's no misunderstanding. I look at them all as mind cancers. They're not equivalent.
Fine. It's one thing.
They're not equivalent. They're all mind cancers.
It's one thing to call the Invisible Man and all their believers a mind cancer. That's fine. I understand that. I don't really care what you prescribe to in your own personal life. But
I'd much rather have a cancerous mole on me than pancreatic cancer, right? I'd much rather have a cancerous mole on my leg, which could be Christianity or Judaism, which I can flick off.
Now you're saying one's worse than all the others.
Nobody's going to kill me for it.
I'm sorry. If you're going to start comparing religions to cancers, I don't believe that you can just say that the cancer of Judaism is easy to just flick off, because number one, they have complete control of the media. You cannot deny that they don't own 10 of the largest Hollywood studios. They don't own all of the major news stations and outlets. They own all of the print media. You cannot deny that. They run the Federal Reserve. For Christ's sake, the head of a Federal Reserve is a goddamn Israeli dual citizen.
You're leaving at Wall Street. I'm with you.
You cannot, honest to God, say that a race of people.
Totally with
that
you.
1 point. What are they? There are 2 billion people on the face of the earth are Muslim.
7 billion. 7 billion people. Yeah.
1 billion are Muslim. 2 billion.
I got the real statistics here. Is that it's like I know this for fact.
All right, so if you could just break down the statistics, if you got the religious demographics of the world, please break that down because
I got them.
I'm going to show you that.
Yeah, 33, 24, and less than 1%. You got 33% of the world are Christian, 24 are Muslim, and less than 1% are Jews. I think there's 13 million Jews total on the planet.
It's 0.2% if you look at it. If there's 8 billion people or 7 billion people on the planet, and there's 14 million Jews, it's 0.2%. Okay, so now you're talking about you want to talk about cancer. All right, cancer is very small, and it does great big damage. And I'll tell you what, that's what the problem is. You cannot equate the insane rambling of a bunch of goat farmers mostly.
Michael, you got to go smaller than that even, because you got to go to the very specific sect of Judaism that causes the problem.
All right, the money-grabbing sect, the power-grabbing sect, a bombing people sect. That's the sect of Judaism. I'm having a serious problem.
About what they are about. Yeah, and I want to just say something again. Is that with all of that, again, to start to say that the core parts of what of this faith are so rotten, worse than all the others. He has obviously our Carl Glenn has a bias against Muslims because he's even said that he's calling it pancreatic cancer to the world. But also here's another thing: if it was so violent, if Islam was so violent, there's fucking 28% of the world or something like that is Muslim. We'd all be toast, okay? But if you really want to go into something, the Zionists, which don't represent all Judaism in my opinion, but that money, the war-mongering sect of Judaism it's not just a religious thing; it's a racial, bloodline, many other things tie into it, and an extreme nationalistic, fascist construct that has been made over there in Israel. They do a ton of damage, and they're just a few million people. So he's right. The Zionists are a cancer to this planet. The Muslims, I've never known of a cancer that can take up 40% of your body and you can still be alive, or whatever, 28% of your body and you can still be alive. I mean, so that's a really weird comparison where you just think about it.
You really got to do your homework on the Christian Crusades. You got to do your homework on the Christian Crusades because it was Muslim battles and encroachment about. I think there was like.
So what about if you're going to go with the Crusades and really compare that to encroachment? Would you say that there needs to be? Would there need to be a crusade in the Arab world to even it out, considering that the Israelis are encroaching on Palestinian land, which was their land in the first place? I mean, come on now. But a bunch of people from Poland, Germany, and Czechoslovakia end up in the middle of the desert. They can't say that they got any sort of ancestral right to that.
I've got First Nations blood in me, and I can tell you something. The reason the First Nations people of North America lost the land is because they didn't have a concept of land ownership. They believed rightfully that the land owned them. They don't own land.
The reason why they lost is because they didn't have guns. They didn't have enough guns. They didn't have enough guns. If they'd have had enough guns, they knew how to kill.
Listen, this Holy Land bullshit, and the Palestinians have been there first. The Hebrews were there first, and the Hebrews were there first. Listen, as far as the Palestinians, they call themselves, they're all Islamic. And Islam didn't come around until 570.
You're coming around with shit that's straight out of a handbook. This isn't even funny. The Hebrews were there first. So let me ask you a question. Somebody who's got let's just take a random Jewish person, and since we're in the United States, let's go with somebody who's well known on TV. Let's go with Wolf Blitzer. All right,
yeah.
Wolf Blitzer. What kind of Arab blood does he have? What sort of ancestral tie does Wolf Blitzer have to Palestine? So, give me that one in the great big Hebrew definition. Right?
Well, see,
give me some explanation on this one.
You could get in a fight in an empty room, my friend. You want me to pick up for Judaism and Zionism, and I'm not picking up.
That's all you've been doing. That's all you've been doing.
Dude, you've got some
you're
major
taking every
issues.
opportunity to derail a conversation and to rip on another religion. You've taken delight in comparing Islam to cancer. That's a little odd.
I don't like child rapists. I don't like rapists, and I don't like warlords. Muhammad was all three.
Okay, now let's go into the child rape. Let's go into sex trafficking. All right, you want to get into that? Currently today, sex trafficking happens in Israel at a great rate. That sex trafficking has to be financed.
Yeah.
And who runs that?
Can I? I'm the host
So what
of the
we're saying
show.
is the world's
I'm
full of
gonna
pieces.
talk. Everybody. For a second there. I'm not going to even say whose side anymore. I'm going to take this. But I'm saying that Michael's brought a lot of good points. Is that it seems like whenever we were about to talk about Zionism, change the subject and start talking about Islam. And look, I don't have any problem towards. Well, okay, there's probably faith that I do have problems too. Or problems against, but when talking about Islam, Judaism, Christianity, to just a generic person with no other constructs put in there. We're not talking about a Christian Protestant. We're not talking about a Zionist. We're not, we're just talking about Jew, Muslim, Christian, and not a Wahhabi. We're just talking about the generic three religions. I don't have a problem until they start putting these constructs that are involved in some of these religions, but not every one of them are that, or not the average. Well, okay, I can't say the average, but without any other of these things put into the religion. For example, like a Christian, a regular Christian that's not involved with any evangelical church, or that often are connected back to Zionism, or is not involved with the Catholic Church, but just a completely non-denominational Christian, are very decent people, from what I understand, and they take the Bible for the peaceful message, and the average Muslim seem to be generally peaceful people, from my personal experiences, and that's what you were bringing up a lot of, Glenn, earlier in the show, is personal experiences. And Jewish. I've met Jews that are against Zionism on the Facebook. It's kind of uncommon, but they are there, and then there's ones that have woken up and realized the cult that Zionism is and what the destruction's done. But look, this whole conversation is derailed real quickly. We just have people talking over each other, and then we have, and Glenn, I have to say that I know you were about to leave the show, and then Michael, I let him put his beef with you, and but I wanted to talk about Africa today, and I'm sorry, but I'm just going to ask that maybe we just bring it into this conversation, brain check it for later, because I know there's callers that would just want to talk about Africa. I haven't talked about half the stuff I want to talk about that has no. I'm not going to really bring any religious.
Jews finance the slave trade in Africa. All right, you guys have a good night.
Thanks, Michael. Talk to you later. Well, anyways, that is true. I mean, I'm not. Again, I think that. Of course, I don't share the same opinions as any of those callers.
That was the most unique. That was the most unique experience I've had on radio.
Well, Michael, I share. He made a lot of good points, but I don't share the same views as him to what his extent. But
no, he took it a little further than I would. But
I think again, but I just want to point out is that Michael is another host at UCY, so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Michael's he does his show on Tuesdays at 9, and Glenn, unfortunately, I have no idea who he was, and he was a Jew, and he brought up a good point, is that a lot of the same phrases he was using were right out of Zionist pamphlets. So I'm a little suspicious to what his motives are. He was pretending like, and I've seen this before, the atheist militant, they changed that. People that are online, they claim to be not, don't have any religious bias, but yet they use Zionist.
He showed a classic. I don't want to use the word new atheist, but he did use classic militant atheist tactics that I've seen often used by people like Sam Harris.
Well, I've heard those literally same words be used. I follow one of these atheist pages just to see what they're thinking. I used to agree with kind of, at first I thought it was going to be, when I liked the page, I thought it was going to be something totally different. This is like 2+ years ago. And then I found out what it was really about. It was pretty much one of those militant atheist pages. So I just follow it to see what is the militant atheist thoughts. To kind of, I like,
Chris, I'm gonna have to leave you now. I'm sorry.
I know I know you have to. Well, let's see. Can you stay around like 5 minutes? I just wanted to get one caller that doesn't derail our show. You know.
My dad was just.
I don't even say that was a derailment because that was an interesting experience. But
yeah.
Can you stay around 5, please?
My dad was just telling me that it was time to go on. I'm really sorry. If it were up to me, I would stay 5 more minutes.
Oh. Anyways,
I'm sorry, man.
Yeah. I guess we'll just have to go this last 30 minutes. There's no color. I got a lot to talk about, so it'll be fine.
When CP Libre comes back, we should be in much better shape.
Well, again, like I said, his dad, he's got his job, and he's a little bit more tight.
Problem.
He's got to travel and stuff to do, but he'll be back next week.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for keeping your cool during that whole thing. I know that's the first time that happens. That's not the first time it's happened to you, but the first time it's on your own show. It's a little bit stressful, but good thing you didn't do anything that could cause us any big harm, because I've had co-hosts before that did stuff that came back to bite us later on how they dealt with it. We dealt with it the best we could.
It was an interesting experience. I kind of hope we don't have another one, but if we have another, we have another.
Well, like I said,
Chris, you're gonna have to call back UCY Radio. I'm gonna hang up.
Okay.
All right. Bye, guys.
Okay, we're back on air. This is just Chris J for the last 30 minutes of the show. And also, I just wanted to point out something that Michael is another host on this network that was bringing up the points, and I don't agree with everything he had to say. And I think I clarified that very well. Is that I think he did generalize the word Jew for Zionist, I think, but I know him personally. He's not a hateful person by any means, I don't know him personally, as in I've met him in person, but I've talked to him on Skype, and we've had a little bit of debates before. The way he handles himself at debates, he sticks to his guns. It's a bit to be respected. I don't know Glenn May. If I knew him, I wouldn't go so hard on him in that debate. I know it seemed like I was biased towards him, but what he was saying, it was inexcusable. So sorry, you can't come on here either bashing somebody else's religions or bashing all religions, and you're an atheist or whatever. You can't be doing that kind of stuff. I don't want division in my. It's not that I'm afraid of offending people. I don't want division. This is such a weak movement in general. I'm saying by the already divisions that exist, we don't need new divisions. And look, also here's another thing. There's only 1 or 2, maybe 1 or 2% of this country awake. We need all of them. We need all of us together to. If we actually have a chance of changing things in this country, changing things around the world, stop, releasing power from these Rothschild bankers and getting rid of the New World Order, it's not going to be an easy task, and it's not going to happen if we continue to be divided, if we continue to be, get into religious arguments. And, I do question somebody that uses a lot, that was starting to use some of the stuff right out of Zionist pamphlets, I don't know which one it was, or it seems like simple Zionist rhetoric about Muslims in general, and, the degrading of their faith. I think, I'm sorry also that we're not going to be able to have any other callers today, since I'm the only one. I don't have any conference call abilities on this tablet, so it'll just be me talking about Africa for the next 20-ish minutes. So I think that honestly it's a bit better this way, because with callers, you see how much time that ate up. Well, it's 10:34 already. Fuck, that's I gotta say, I'm gonna give one shout out before I started actually going into another long thing about Africa. I'm gonna shout out that first caller, because she was actually she was very positive, and like I said, you know, I'm not, you know, like I said, I like the positive callers that actually bring, you know, she contributed to the conversation a little bit, and and even when I thought she was going to go down a little track that I wasn't going to really like, you know, I brought my own opinion. She respected it and actually pretty much agreed with me. You know, that was nice change compared to a religious argument and caused by a person that I'm sorry, that seemed like trolling right there. Seemed like textbook trolling. We're gonna go into here to Africa. Let's go back to okay. Now I'm going to talk about Muslims, but in a good way. I'm going to talk about Gamal Abdel Nasser. This is the guy that mentored Gaddafi. Gaddafi. He was in the 1950s. He was a boy, and then Nasser shows up in 56, becomes the president of Egypt at a very young age. I believe Nasser was he was like 40 years old. He was like Chavez was very young also when he became in power over in Venezuela. He was 44. And, it seems like sometimes the youngest leaders do the best jobs, and Nasser did a great job as president of Egypt. Yeah, he was only like 40 when he started. He ruled Egypt for about 13 years, and actually, this is where it comes into another thing. Talking about the Zionists again, the Lavon affair. Well, the United States and Eisenhower and Nasser actually got a little bit more friendly than Israel originally wanted, because they wanted them to remain enemies. Because Nasser, he was a very strong anti-Zionist, because he's the one that said, "Here's the problem: why Israel will never have peace. They left black, and they came back white." Saying those are not the same people that were there 2,000 years ago. People there 2,000 years ago were, they were much darker. The biblical Jews, the Jews that are described in the Bible, yes, they were real. They weren't figments of the people who wrote the Bible's imaginations, like some people would claim. In fact, a lot of the Bible is, even if you're not Christian, is historically accurate. However, I'm not going to go into that whole, I think that argument got me into religious thinking. It got me into thinking that religious mindset. But, I'm just pointing out, going back to that, their argument, even biblically, a lot of people's Christians usually it's a Christian argument for the state of Israel, the Christian Zionists. I think that it's a major problem because of what the Zionists are. They're not too friendly of the Christians in Palestine. They murder Christians in Palestine. So I think it's very alarming that these Christians the Christians would support, or these Christians. I think the mass majority of Christians around the world do not support them supporting this illegal state. But again, there's no biblical claim to the land, and there's no territorial claim to the land, obviously, as that was Palestinian land for hundreds of years. But Nasser, he was for the Palestinian cause heavily, and Gaddafi admired this guy. He, because of his standing up for the Palestinian cause, and his new form of socialism that he's creating. It wasn't like what was seen in Russia, where we was seen the former. It wasn't really like any other form of socialism that ever made. If it was closest to anything, it was Tito. Tito's socialism was a more national road to socialism. Not national as in what Stalin had made. There were, one country, one socialist nation, or whatever the policy was. Tito had made a national. Believe every country can make their own socialism to fit better their own country. But this is different. This is actually more about just improving the lives of the poor people, purely to that message, but bring its own Arab identity to it. And and it was very successful because the overall standard of living in Egypt improved tremendously during Nasser's leadership. And you just got to respect that, being right next to Israel eventually did bomb Egypt, but he just sticking to his guns against Israel. And then, Nasser, it was just tremendous. He didn't listen to anybody really. And he was one of those leaders that was really improving Africa and also by just the fact that he was the mentor of Gaddafi just says everything. Gaddafi was such a great leader himself, but this guy was the guy that made Gaddafi who he was. The only thing that he had the bad to say about Gaddafi, Nasser said that Gaddafi was a little bit erratic. He was a little bit, He was a little bit, he was a little bit too excitable, But Nasser was kind of a man of, he was very diplomatic. I think that's one way to describe him. Nasser, during the Levant affair, though, what happened was that, because of the growing U.S.-Egyptian relationships, the Israelis, like they do to this day, have terror cells and terrorist groups that they fund. A terrorist group that was supportive of Israel in Egypt. They activated them and they bombed the United States soldiers. And then, pretty much Israel, what they did was make it seem like that the Egyptians had just let terrorists attack the American soldiers, and now that they can't trust the Egyptians for their safety. And then the Americans' relationship quickly soured with Nasser, and that was the end of that. And then from then on out, we had about 10 years in between. Excuse me there. 10 years passed before, or actually more than that, because Gaddafi took part. He was a coup, like I said, but was very well supported because not many people supported the monarchy of King Idris. King Idris was corrupt, so Gaddafi took power, and Gaddafi took power in a coup. It was bloodless, though. Nobody died in the coup. It was just, I don't know, I think he just resigned. Pretty much King Idris resigned. He saw the force coming at him, and King Idris just went into exile, I believe. I don't even think he left the country, and Gaddafi takes power. Then Gaddafi becomes, like I said, there was like 2 periods of building that country. I didn't actually say before I wasn't talking too much about the first period of building the country, but until that 86 war, that destabilized them for a little bit. But then from 86 to or from 86 on all the way up to the next 25 years, they built up and got more powerful, by prosperity, not by military power so much, but as we saw, NATO bombing their military was not very developed. They spent it all on actually good stuff like healthcare and education, and food and oil and stuff that people need. That there was all kinds of stuff. Like if you were sick, sometimes Libyan medical care wasn't the best, so they would pay for you to go to another country to receive adequate medical care. If you couldn't get employed in the country, you would receive, and you had a profession. Like if you're a doctor, they would pay you doctor's pay, starting doctor's pay, I would think, from that, from the point that you filed after you haven't been since you haven't been employed for a while. It would be like after if you didn't get employed within a year or whatever of graduating, they would do that, and then you receive money for that. They would help you out with a farm if you need to. They would give you $50,000. To help start a farm, because they were really big into trying to make that country into a self-sustaining and eventually a country that could export a lot of goods and become more prosperous. And then they also they had subsidized food, they had subsidized oil. That's why the country had went from poverty to most of it in the middle class. They also, there's one other major thing. Oh yeah, if you just had a baby, they would. If you're a woman, they give you like 18 months off. If you're a man, you got like 12 months off, which I think is important because, we have a lot of jobs, people, a lot of mothers, they give birth and then 2 days later they're back to work and stuff like that. That's absolutely ridiculous. They need to have their parents around for that crucial time. And I think both parents need to be around. There needs to be paternal and maternal leave. And that's I think that's important. They just had common sense, really, the Gaddafi regime, and that's why they did so well. And it's not Donald Trump common sense, which is just complete absurd opinions that are really just the establishment's opinions. But he puts it into he pretends to be an anti-establishment, but he's not. He's just this really indictment of the establishment, Donald Trump, that somebody can just run from private sector and join the public sector that easily. remember Gaddafi, he got his he's pretty much homegrown. I mean, he was just a regular he was a regular person, joined the military, and then he was part of the coup. And now it's true there was a little bit of favoritism towards his friends and family, but again, he must have knew something about him because they did a very good job. It wasn't like they went up there and sucked. One of his best friends actually turned on him, though. That's what sucks. And the thing is, it wasn't like he turned on him. It wasn't like he started turning on him in the 70s, but then in the 90s it got worse. But in 2011, actually, he defected and joined the Syrian, or not the Syrian, the Libyan terrorists that were fighting in his country. So that's the ultimate betrayal. I guess that wasn't that good of a friend or something, but I think, I don't know. It's like I'm thinking if my best friend, I don't hope he's not that unloyal. If I ever became leader of somewhere, I become like the Gaddafi of the United States or whatever. I don't think but if that happened, there would be no rebel groups coming up or fake rebel groups. There would be no paid mercenaries. I wouldn't allow it in my country. There would be. I wouldn't care what the international, or anyway, there wouldn't. If I'm guessing at that point, the New World Order is gone. There wouldn't be much of a fake international community to backlash me. But if I'm just saying, it's like I would use common sense. It's like if they have an encampment out in the middle of the country and these fake rebels, and I find out about it, these paid people from whatever country, because they're being paid by the United States. I don't know what country would finance my rebels. I'm just going to say Israel's still around, and they finance because they realize I'm anti-Zionist, and they finance these Zionist rebels against me. So find out if there's an encampment of them, they're going to get treated like how the Russians are treating ISIS in Syria. It won't be pretty for them. But that's just a little insight into my future leadership. Of some people are probably trying to. Oh, I don't know. Some people are picturing me like I'm going to be some kind of brutal dictator or something like that. But if you know about Gaddafi, you realize I would be actually one of the most fairest leaders that have been around in modern history. Well, we're in the last 12 minutes of the show or so before we go to the bumper. We hit the bumper at 10:59. Wow, it's late already. That's weird. It got late that quickly, man. We just have to squeeze some last points in. The Zionists in Africa, they've done a lot of damage because they finance a lot of these groups like again ISIS. ISIS is all in North Africa. They're in Egypt. They're in Libya. They're funded by Israel. They've been trained by Israel, and Egypt and Egypt and Libya. ISIS actually they actually hold the city where Gaddafi was, where Gaddafi lived in, Turkey. They hold it right now, and there's these Gaddafi loyalists actually that have started springing up, and that's why I have hope that Libya will eventually return to green Libyan control because of that. Because these Gaddafi loyalists are actually fighting. They're fighting ISIS now inside of Libya. And, sure, they don't have too much territory, I don't think, at the moment. There's another civil war. It really never ended. But now there's a splintering faction between the Muslim Brotherhood that's United States funded. Another part, the original rebels that took control of Libya after Gaddafi. So they're also United States funded. And then there's ISIS in there and thrown into the bunch. I think they're more working closely with the Muslim Brotherhood, United States funded people. And then there's the other side, the Gaddafi loyalists. I think ultimately, in all reality, is that I think that the ultimate battle is really between the Gaddafi loyalists and all the other forces. Because the Gaddafi loyalists are the only ones that are anti-Zionist, anti-New World Order. These Gaddafi loyalists are educated and they're passionate. The Gaddafi loyalists versus everybody else fight is the fight that Libya is truly about, and yes, it's against everybody. They're going against the world practically there, but I predict them like Rocky. They're gonna be the underdogs that win know, but again, it is kind of hard to say that when I do know the situation. I've seen the maps. That's where often I get a lot of these, like people might wonder how I get all these insights on the war. It's just I look at the maps and I look them in detail. I don't just take a little snippet. I look at the cities where these people are going around and stuff like that, and you can get them online, and I can stay up to date. Like on Syria, I have a very well mapped out image about what Syria looks like right now, and I know that the Russians are. Actually, they haven't updated one. I don't think since the Russians entered. I bet their ice has been cut down probably. There's a part where they ran all the way from northern Syria at the northern Syrian border all the way down to the southern Syrian border, but that's probably been cut apart, and that'd be important that there's no place where ISIS could go right from Iraq all the way to Turkey without, encountering any Syrian government, Iranian or Russian forces. But that's not going to happen. I mean, that's not going to continue for much longer. So soon they're going to be toast, and then within a few weeks, or maybe it'll take a few months, but because be realistic, it has been a lengthy fight so far, and Assad's troops aren't no chumps. I mean, they've been fighting for a while, and they've had trouble fighting them. So, but the Russian army are a whole different thing. I think that them being there, ISIS does not stand a chance. Going back to Libya, yeah, it's the Gaddafi loyalists versus everybody against the world, but it's I think that this is not just one. This is not the only fight really that I think For example, I think that of Egypt, I think eventually a Nasserist type government could take back charge, and that'd be cool. A Nasserist, green Libya again in North Africa, because the Nasserists have actually they're still in the leftist parties in Egypt. They were actually part of the Muslim Brotherhood overthrow. I was pretty happy when it happened in 2013 when the second Egyptian revolution overthrew the American-supported Muslim Brotherhood. But I was disappointed to see Sisi act as how he has, where he seems to be hard on Israel at other times, but at other times he's flooding the tunnels where Palestinian refugees run across to get supplies. I know at the same time that it's complicated because they are legitimately fighting ISIS over in Libya, and they're fighting ISIS in the Sinai, but they seem to be helping Israel at the same time, and they don't seem to be willing to work with the Palestinians too much, even though they say that they're for Palestinian statehood. They are at the very best only for a two-state solution, which I don't think is very feasible. So I'm not very supportive of Sisi, but I think that inside the left in Egypt, which are pretty big, they're bigger than they were a couple of years ago. They could, they could surge up, and then I think that there could be a third Egyptian revolution. Is it possible? I don't know. Or I guess maybe with the entire parliament of Egypt surrounding Sisi being of people that are anti-Israel and anti-West, either Sisi could change or he could be thrown out. I think that though the Nasserist Egypt and a green Libya are very possible. We only got 5 minutes left of the show, so I'm going to tell everybody. Maybe, let's say I covered that. Covered North Africa. Covered the Congo. Covered South Africa. It wasn't a bad day actually. Zimbabwe. Covered about King Leopold. I covered. I haven't covered yet. Oh yeah, shit. I did not cover. What about Kwame Nkrumah? Kwame Nkrumah was a leader of Ghana, which Ghana is currently controlled by a United States controlled fascist dictator. He's very little talked about, and he rules with a complete iron fist. There's no opposition in his country because he's brutal. He pretty much he's at the threat of getting your head cut off. He has he definitely rules with an iron fist, and but back in the past there was this leader who he was in the non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement was a movement of it was generally socialist at the beginning. There was Suharto, not Suharto, it's Sukarno. Big difference, really. Okay, but Sukarno was a left-leaning socialist leader of Indonesia who brought quite a bit of change to Indonesia when he was there. Then there was Tito. I've already explained Tito a lot, and I've talked about Tito a lot. I think we get the gist about him. Nasser, just talked about him. There was this guy, Kwame Nkrumah. I pronouncing that right. And there was the leader of India at that time, Nehru. I'm just making sure there's something. Nehru. Sounds Indian. Okay. So I actually pronounced these interesting names right. That you see in these different. But anyways, he was part of that. And then he in this few years of change, he had brought quite a bit. He had brought a place that, West Africa, that's had a very turbulent history and very poor history. I mean, these are where some of the poorest countries on the planet are located, and he brought it to actually a decent point of prosperity. I mean, it was he actually I don't know too much about some of the specific programs he did, but I think he did bring healthcare, education to the country, and he was overthrown eventually. I think it was a coup sponsored by the United States government. He was there. He was there from like 59 to 66. But his main role really was bringing a. He was a supporter of a national road to socialism, just like Nasser, or Tito. And he was a pretty decent leader, but. Of course, that's been completely reversed this day. And I'm going to bring out one more point. Somalia. Somalia, before the United States led intervention, the U.S.-led intervention was like in the 90s. Before that, there was a government there was actually stability at one point in Somalia, believe it or not. There was a leader that was there for like 20-something years, and he was I think he had, he was I know he was anti-United States imperialism. He wasn't the best leader. I can tell you that because I think he associated with that Romanian guy Nicole Sasau, but maybe that was just out of necessity that he associated with Nicole Sasau. But he did. Somalia was in a better shape at that time. They were not as poor, and there was not the chaos there is now. And then as soon as the United States come in, it was already on its way down after he left in '91. This is a few years after the United States show up into Somalia. We all know what happened after that. I mean, look, there's these few different governments that are fighting for power in Somalia. There's piracy. There's a civil war inside the country. There's mass poverty. It's a train wreck, really, and it's really the indictment of U.S. imperialism, because it wasn't that bad of a country, and the people were actually decently civilized. They are decently civilized people, but they live in a very horrible country. I mean, a horrible country as in it's hectic. And now, I think Libya, Somalia, and Ghana, really, those three countries, Libya, Somalia, and Ghana, those are indictments of where U.S. imperialism has gone terribly wrong for the people of the country and for the masses of the country, and also the Zionists who have a big role in these color revolutions, coups and this is what happens. The show's going to end here in a few seconds. I'm going to thank everybody who listened to the show, Voice of Rebellion Radio. Again, shout out to that first caller. First caller brought a lot of good vibes.
Point and no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely putting charge of the country. Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never